The night they decided who I was allowed to be happened in a crowded room, under warm lights with everyone watching. My mother laughed first, loud enough to carry, and said, "You know how he is. He's still figuring things out." People smiled politely, the way they do when something uncomfortable is framed as a joke. It was my cousin's engagement dinner, one of those family events where chairs are too close and stories get repeated. I had been seated at the end of the table, half hidden behind a floral centerpiece, already used to being placed where I wouldn't interrupt the picture. My uncle raised his glass and started listing accomplishments. Promotions, new houses, babies. He skipped me, then paused, then added, "And him, still, independent." The word hung there, unfinished. Someone chuckled. No one corrected it. I nodded once, the way I always did. Calm, neutral. I had learned early that reacting only confirmed the role they assigned me. They talked about my life like it was unfinished business, like I was something that had stalled. My sister leaned over and whispered that I should take it as motivation. She meant well, I think, but she didn't hear what I heard. She didn't feel the erasing. What none of them mentioned was deliberate. They didn't talk about my apartment because they'd never asked where I lived. They didn't mention my work because they'd decided years ago it didn't count. They still called it that thing you do, even after I stopped correcting them. I had stopped bringing details home because details were ammunition. Every success became a reason to ask for favors, loans, explanations. Silence was easier. When dessert came, my mother stood and told a story about how I'd always been sensitive, how I struggled, how family had to be patient with me. She said it with a smile that suggested care. The room nodded along, relieved to be told how to interpret me. I watched hands move, forks scrape plates. People accept a version of me that made them comfortable. I realized then that this wasn't forgetfulness. It was design. If I stayed small, others stayed important. After dinner, my aunt pulled me aside and asked if I was still between things. I told her I was fine. She patted my arm, slow and firm, like you would a child. I left early. No announcement, no excuse. I walked out into the parking lot and sat in my car until the noise in my chest settled into something colder and clearer. I didn't feel angry. That surprised me. I felt precise. Something had shifted. Not in them, in me. On the drive home, I understood that I had been quietly edited out of my own family for years, and that night they made it public. I didn't plan anything. I didn't promise myself change. I simply stopped trying to be seen by people who preferred me invisible. The days after were quiet in a way that felt intentional. No messages asking if I got home safe. No follow-ups. The silence was framed as normal, but it carried weight. It told me the dinner had achieved what it was meant to. I went back to my routines. Work, groceries, evenings alone. From the outside, nothing changed. Inside, I replayed conversations I'd spent years dismissing. Small comments, assumptions stated as facts, jokes that landed only one way. A week later, my sister called. She sounded hesitant, careful. She asked if I was okay, then quickly shifted topics. Toward money. She said Mom was stressed. Bills. Planning. Nothing serious, she added before mentioning that my name had come up. Apparently, I had agreed to help with something. Apparently, I'd been generous. Apparently, this wasn't new. I asked her what she meant. She paused, then said she thought I knew. My mother had told people I was covering a shortfall, that I preferred not to talk about it, that it was private. It wasn't true, I didn't argue. I asked who knew. She listed names, family friends, an uncle, someone from church. The same circle that had watched me get reduced to a punchline days earlier. When I hung up, I opened my email and searched my name. I found messages forwarded without my knowledge, a draft agreement I'd never seen. My signature scanned from an old document and dropped onto a form I hadn't approved. It was subtle, plausible, easy to miss if you trusted the people involved. The humiliation at dinner hadn't been random. It softened the ground. If I was unreliable, confused, still finding my way, then using my name made sense. If I was fragile, then speaking for me felt like protection. I realized then how often I'd covered for them, how many times I'd corrected misunderstandings quietly instead of publicly, how often I'd absorbed inconvenience to keep peace. They were counting on that. My mother called 2 days later. Her tone was light, affectionate. She asked why I'd been distant. She mentioned stress, family pulling together. She didn't ask for permission. She spoke as if it was already settled. I listened. I let her talk. I noted what she said and what she avoided. When she finally paused, I told her I hadn't agreed to anything. I said it calmly, no accusation, just a fact. She laughed short and sharp and said I must have forgotten that I was always like this, sensitive, overthinking. That word again, sensitive, a way to invalidate without sounding cruel. After the call, I didn't feel hurt. I felt done. I stopped responding to group messages. I didn't correct stories. I didn't defend my reputation. For the first time, I let the version of me they'd created operate without interference. I gathered documents, old emails, bank statements, dates. I wrote things down, not emotionally, just chronologically. I understood something clearly then. The dinner wasn't about me at all. It was about positioning, about making sure that when lines were crossed, no one would question it. That was the moment I made a decision I should have made years earlier. I stopped protecting people who never protected me. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't warn them. I learned instead how much damage silence could do when paired with accuracy. I requested copies of everything my name appeared on, politely, formally. I framed it as organization, as clarity. People respond well to calm requests when they assume you're harmless. I scheduled a consultation with an attorney whose office sat above a dry cleaner. No glass walls, no drama. I laid out documents in order. He didn't interrupt. He asked questions that turned confusion into timelines. Nothing they'd done was loud. That was the problem. It was quiet enough to feel deniable, but consistent enough to prove intent. I opened a separate account and locked down my credit. I sent a single certified letter revoking any assumed authority to act on my behalf. It was short, neutral. It cited dates and documents. It didn't accuse. It informed. The responses came fast. Confusion, hurt, calls I didn't answer. Messages asking why I was being distant, why I was making things complicated. No one asked if I was wronged. I kept going. I met with a financial advisor to document discrepancies. He flagged patterns I hadn't named yet. Small transfers, reimbursements routed oddly. The kind of things that only surface when someone finally looks. I didn't share updates. I didn't post. I didn't correct rumors. Letting them believe I was unaware gave me time. People began stepping carefully around me without knowing why. Conversations shifted when I entered rooms. My name stopped being used casually. My mother sent a long message explaining intentions. Love, family, misunderstandings. It ended with a request to talk things through privately. I forwarded it to my attorney and didn't reply. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon when an account was frozen pending review. A signature was questioned. A phone call was returned with someone else listening in. Suddenly, processes mattered. Proof mattered. Tone didn't. I was asked formally to confirm statements. I did. I answered only what I was asked. Nothing extra. My family began to realize something was happening without understanding what. They sensed loss of control before they saw consequences. I remained the same person. Polite, quiet, unemotional. The difference was that this time I wasn't absorbing the impact. I was directing it. By the end of the week, I received confirmation in writing that no future decisions could be made using my name. My role was defined, limited, protected. I sat at my kitchen table and read the letter twice. There was no relief, no satisfaction, just alignment. For the first time, the version of me they'd underestimated was no longer available, and the ground beneath them had quietly shifted. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It moved slowly, the way reality does when it can no longer be avoided. Plans were postponed. Invitations stopped. People asked careful questions instead of making statements. My mother's voice, when she finally called again, sounded unfamiliar, smaller. She spoke about stress and confusion, about things being taken out of context. She never apologized. I told her I wasn't available to discuss it. I meant emotionally, not logistically. An uncle lost a position he'd held quietly for years. A family friend stopped returning calls. Someone else had to explain decisions they'd made, assuming I would stay silent. Stories changed when they were forced to exist on paper. At the next family gathering, I wasn't there. Neither was my name. It was easier that way. I heard later that people were confused about me, that they didn't know where I stood, that I'd changed. The truth was simpler. I had stopped compensating. No one accused me directly. There were no confrontations, just distance, just adjustments, just the slow recognition that the version of me they relied on no longer showed up. I kept my routines. I slept better. I answered fewer calls. I felt lighter without performing stability for people who benefited from my silence. One afternoon, I passed my mother at a grocery store. We nodded. She looked like she wanted to say something rehearsed. I gave her nothing to work with. I wasn't angry. I wasn't waiting for acknowledgement. I had learned that closure doesn't require agreement. The power I reclaimed wasn't loud. It didn't change how others saw me. It changed how little that mattered. I stopped being the invisible buffer that absorbed consequences meant for others. I became specific, documented, defined. There was no reunion, no forgiveness scene, no lesson delivered, just a quiet ending to a role I never agreed to play. And for the first time in my life, I walked forward without carrying anyone else's story about who I was supposed to be.